Anybody who's here. Welcome to everyone watching and anyone who will watch afterwards. My name is Manwara Ali, and today I'm going to be having a culture conversation with Kathryn Reid. So, just a tiny intro about myself. I'm passionate about leadership in women. So, a lot of the work I do and my visibility on LinkedIn and on YouTube is around being a woman leader, leading in a space by being yourself, basically. And that's the kind of thing I encourage in most other leaders. So I do actually deliver a leadership course, as well as being a chief executive of a small charity in East London. I'm also a director of a charity working with vulnerable women abroad, and a few bits and pieces. But most importantly, what I've really enjoyed doing via LinkedIn and the global network that I'm beginning to develop is the connections I'm making. And I'm loving these conversations I've started on Sundays. I thought I'm only going to do a few, but I'm really enjoying these. So over to you, Kathryn. Please introduce yourself.
Great, thanks. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for inviting me, because it's really nice to be able to have a chat on a Sunday evening about some of our favourite topics. I'm a sales and marketing consultant focusing on export, and I spent 20 years working with various kinds of products, from automotive through to infant formula and a few other things in between, before I decided I was going to go self-employed as a consultant. So my background was really in like country management and so on. But even before that, I was a linguist. And so I spent some time, obviously, as a student abroad, and which is how I ended up living in Austria now. And yeah, that was basically me in a nutshell.
Fantastic. And Kathryn, will it surprise you that this culture conversation is happening because of you?
Really?
Months ago, last year, I put a post on LinkedIn and I asked people what topic they'd like me to talk about. And fundraising came first and culture came second. But I remember you saying, whatever, just get it going, woman, more or less.
Yeah. Perfectly reasonable. Hi, Stella. I see Stella
Hi,
is.
Stella. So, on this wonderful Sunday, I don't know if you've had a chance to listen to some of the conversations I've had with Juliet and with Kate. It's just been really fascinating. I think culture is one of those things that it's about everything and
Yeah.
anything.
Yeah.
So
That's
I
what
just
makes it
wanted to, yeah,
interesting.
go on. What's your view on culture?
Oh, culture. I mean, it often seems like it's such a big topic. And people, I think a lot of people, when you hear culture, they think about it as being something that's, let's say, they think about it of things like classical music or theatre, and they think about all of these things that are kind of quite highbrow. Whereas actually, culture is just the way that different people live and interact with each other, really, isn't it? And the way that they actually do that. So I really find it a very interesting topic, both from a business perspective, but also from a personal perspective, because what even if you don't actually consciously recognize the culture that you have in your family or in your workplace or in the places that you're interacting with other people, then you have a culture of some kind, whether it be good or bad, but you have a culture, don't you? So,
Mm.
and I think a lot of people don't actually realize that, even if they are not consciously making any effort to contribute to having the right kind of culture that they would really like to have, that they actually still do have some kind of a culture. So yeah.
And it's quite interesting because we just talk about self-awareness, don't we? And it's the same thing. Like in my leadership role, I had no idea what culture I was influencing for a very, very long time until I realized, and that came with greater self-awareness, because you cannot determine something or the way of living until you know. So it's very much like, you know, in the business development world, if I was a consultant for a company, the first thing I would say is you need to review your current practice to know where you're at. And that then helps with making the business more aware of, okay, what's our company culture at the moment? What is it that we could be changing to make it better?
Definitely. And lots of people really don't think about it in that way. And they don't think of just doing a review and seeing, okay, well, what is working right now? What do I like? And you might not use those words to actually describe it. You might actually think more along the terms of, what do I like about the situation that I'm in right now? Or what works well in this relationship? Or why does that friendship or that group of friends work better than another group of friends, for example? Those might be different ways of people are actually looking at it, but in the end, it often comes down to the kind of culture that you have within that group of people, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And I'm just fascinated by some of these places you've been to. Every Tuesday, I see you post something about somewhere you've been. And I must say, sometimes I feel envy, but other times, you know, admiration, I think. And I find that, you know, I recently, with Kate's conversation with Kate, you put some comments. So I was really interested in knowing, what made you think that way? So I don't know if you want to repeat it, just to clarify.
I'm just thinking back as to exactly the comment, and I was saying that um, sometimes people weaponize culture in some ways, that they use it in quite a toxic is a little bit of an overused word at the moment, but they use it in a way that's really quite negative, in that they see that they've got, for example, it might just be a very selfish way about it, that you go somewhere and, for example, you know that one member of the group is allergic to something, but you go to a restaurant that's actually specialized in that kind of food. Or if you know that somebody is allergic to peanuts, then taking them to a satay place to go and eat is it's just not a kind way to actually work together with people, or to just kind of, let's say, I've often seen it at big international events, where somebody, for example, will say, well, there's a fish and a vegetarian option, so it doesn't matter if 3 times a day there's pork on the meat side of the menu, even though there's quite a lot of people there who might be Jewish or Muslim or both. That you've got a mix of those kind of cultures. Or you say, okay, there's 3 days, and all 3 days there's beef on the menu, and you just think, well, you can vary these things to take account of what different people need and what different people like. In the same way that if you work with somebody who doesn't drink alcohol, then dragging them into a bar is not the way to make them feel comfortable working together with you, is it? So yeah.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I've worked with colleagues who felt like that, and I myself have never challenged it in the past where I've not felt comfortable, except
Yeah.
maybe I think it was 3, 4, 5 years ago when I was in a meeting. I was amongst a group, and somebody said, we're going to go and let's celebrate. We're going to have our meeting in a pub. And I turned around and said, because I was quite confident by then, I said to this individual, I said, oh, so Sarah, you want to exclude me, do you? And she said, no, I don't. Why do you say that? I said, well, obviously you know I'm a Muslim woman. It's not my scene to go to a pubs, and you've decided. And she said, no, we're going to change the venue. So they all suddenly became, and been my learning. We live in such a multicultural society where
Yes.
it's, and one of my colleagues actually recently said, it's like, Manwara, is so hard to be inclusive because you can't possibly know everything and be aware of everything. But if I, as a Muslim person, don't feel comfortable to bring it up, you won't know what you don't know.
Yes and no. Because on the other hand, from where I'm sitting on the other side of this screen to you, when I look at you, at least in your case, I can see. I mean, you as a Muslim woman, you choose to wear a headscarf. So I can at least, and whilst you shouldn't make assumptions about people, the fact that you choose to wear a headscarf in a culture where it's not necessarily the norm to wear a headscarf all the time would at least make me think twice about, okay, well, maybe, probably you're
Hmm.
Muslim and therefore suggesting we go somewhere for a quick drink, we would be better off in a coffee bar than in a pub.
And I'm so glad you said that because I come from Bangladesh and that's where I was born.
Mm.
I arrived in the UK from a very early age as a infant, and I always feel that where I grew up, there were Hindus, Muslims, and Christians. So not every
Mm.
Asian skinned woman like me is going to wear a headscarf. And like especially Hindus and Christians in Bangladesh don't wear headscarves, and a lot of Muslims don't as well. But inclusivity isn't about let's treat all Muslims the same or let's treat all people that wear headscarves the same. It's about being considerate and actually listening and understanding enough to figure out what your work colleagues really feel. And then that
Yeah.
means you're creating an environment like that, doesn't it? So I'm just like fascinated with how some of those places you've traveled to, have you got some interesting examples of where perhaps you made a mistake or error in judgment? Would you like to share?
Errors in judgment. I mean, I guess there have been lots of things, especially at the beginning. And I mean, I really don't know how many of them I just didn't pick up on, because you don't know what you don't know. And um, I mean, I remember maybe it was my first trip to Israel, and um, and I didn't really have. I mean, I had for business it was okay, but for um, I think we went somewhere. They took me to they took me to Bethlehem, and then they took me um, to the church. They took me to the church of the, what is it? The Church of the Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which is, you know, kind of important to the Christian faith. And I'd got like a sleeveless top on and hadn't really thought twice about it. They hadn't told me that that was what the day was going to include, so I hadn't thought to, and I felt really quite uncomfortable with that, and ended up buying something to just put round me. But I think there have been also cases. I was in Iran one time, and I was introduced to, I'm going to say, the Minister of Health or something. And because I'm, based in Austria, when you meet somebody, you automatically shake their hand every time you meet them, even like your office colleagues and so on. And I obviously just stretched out my hand, and he was just like, you know,
Mm.
and I was just like, oh, right, pull the hand back and try and pretend I just didn't do that. As soon as I'd done it, I realized, okay, that was kind of not really what I should have done. But yeah, things sometimes happen, or things sometimes happen like you linguistically, for example. I remember once being in an English class, and as a student, I was teaching English in a grammar school here. And I asked a child, she was maybe 10, 11, that kind of age. And I asked her to repeat something. And I asked her twice to repeat it because I hadn't heard it. She was at the back of the class, and she was very, very quiet, and I just hadn't heard it. And instead of saying to her, please, could you speak more loudly? I just asked her to repeat it.
Mm.
And she thought that she'd said the wrong thing and ended up in tears and didn't say anything in my classes for the next 2 or 3 months. And
Oh,
that was, and I mean, that's like probably 30 years ago, and I still remember that particular case.
yeah.
So, yeah, there are all kinds of ways that you can, put your foot in it without meaning to, and really hoping to, uh, you know, without any malicious intention at all. So, yeah. But I think in lots of cases, if you're organizing a meal or you're organizing something for a group of people, there's nothing easier than just to say to them, okay, I was thinking we could go to, I don't know, I was thinking we could go to an Indian restaurant for the celebration of the last project. Is everyone okay with that? I can ask the question, can't I, as an open question? And if I've got that level of trust within my team, then people should be able to say, we'd rather do something else, or it would be better to, I don't know, meet somewhere else, go for a walk together, whatever.
Options. Yeah.
Yes.
I have found actually it really challenging sometimes, Catherine, when I've worked with teams where I've had to carefully think about who I delegate that role to. If someone
Yeah.
who, and I think this is, we're talking about personalities here, the archetypes.
Yes.
And if you're working with maybe somebody who isn't detailed, or the
Yeah.
type of person who looks into detail, they're likely to just like boom, 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 and just get the job done. Like, you know,
Just off the list, kind of.
yeah, like checklist, tick list. And you have to be so careful as a leader who you delegate that task to, because it could completely defeat the purpose of what you want to achieve. And I think particularly more challenging when you're trying to advocate diversity and inclusion, if you give somebody the responsibility to organize something. And actually, I agree with you, I don't think it's malicious. Sometimes people don't, because we go so fast. Like, I can talk for myself, I'm very future focused. If you didn't
Hmm.
figure it out yet, Catherine, I'm very future focused. And
Yeah.
that's why reflection has to be a very important part of my life. And
Yeah.
I find that, if because the brain is going so fast and I'm doing things, and as you become more confident in your ability, you kind of realize that you can do more. And I often realize after the situation, and it might only be half an hour later, I think, oh, and then it sinks in. What did Catherine say? Oh, I get it. Now I get it, but I wasn't listening.
Yeah. But I think that that's often a case of we're listening, preparing our answers, aren't we, to say what we're preparing in our head what we're going to say next, rather than actually listening to what the other person is saying to us.
Mm, mm, exactly.
That's,
I'm
yeah.
looking at Stella's comments. You were reading them, weren't you, earlier, about biases.
Yes. Yeah.
All I would say to that, I mean, Stella, I hear you, and sometimes it feels like in a country like the UK that people might know better, but actually, like I was conversing with someone and they were saying they've worked in the public sector for 15 years, and every time someone leaves, the leaving do is usually in the pub, and they've never ever said that they're uncomfortable. And there's someone who prays 5 times, probably like does like the hijab, and like,
Mhm.
I would say a much more practicing Muslim than I am, and they never did. And like, I've always been very comfortable to say it. If you say it in the nicest way possible, so you're not actually critiquing anyone or insulting them, or it looks like you've got a chip on your shoulder about it. There's ways, right?
Yeah. And realistically speaking, these days there are so many people who don't really want to go to the pub.
Mm, mm,
But it's often, if you don't have a good reason for not going to the pub, it's often really hard to say,
mm,
actually, I really don't like going to the pub. Can we go somewhere else?
mm, mm. Somebody told me that, oh, but it's British culture, and people, it's about time. It's about time that anyone living in the UK long enough got used to British culture. And I remembered.
And a tea shop is also British culture, I would say. You know, I mean, that is just as much British culture as going to the pub, isn't it? I mean, I grew up in a family where my parents don't drink.
Mm,
I mean, maybe a glass of wine at Christmas, but that's basically about it. And so I never saw my parents going to the pub. And
mm,
I didn't like, I mean, I drink alcohol, I mean, not in big quantities, but I will occasionally have a glass. But I mean, growing up or as a teenager, as a student, I hated going to the pub because it was so smoky. That was more my thing of, "Ugh, do we have to go to the pub? Can we go somewhere where it's not smoky?"
mm, mm.
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah. You see, that wouldn't be something that lots of people from my background would make the assumption that because you are in Austria or you are British, you have white skin or fair skin, as they say in my culture, that you obviously that's going to be part of your culture. And actually, to say out loud something that I hear often, why is it that certain communities just stick to their own? And it's that thing about, I think, especially with the Asian communities, I think food is
yep,
the biggest, one of the biggest problem, because if pork is forbidden in your religion,
yep,
you're gonna avoid a lot of environments that have pork in it. I mean,
yes,
I can confidently still go to an environment with everything in it and choose to eat salad, and I don't have a problem with that. But not
yep,
everybody will do that.
yeah, yep, exactly. And not everybody is comfortable to, not everybody feels comfortable to speak up or to um, really to make it clear that that is a boundary for them. I
Mm,
mean, I've got in my scout section at the moment, I've got one girl who's Muslim,
mm,
and we had a winter camp a few weeks ago that was like Friday till Sunday, and I didn't arrive until the Saturday for various reasons. And as they were just prepared, and I'm looking at what they've got for Saturday lunch, knowing full well that they weren't going to serve me pork because
mm,
because I don't eat pork. I just don't like it.
mm.
And that there were several vegetarians in the group. But I knew that from her registration, she hadn't registered as vegetarian, and
Mm,
it was roast pork for lunch. And so I was just like, um, how much of the vegetarian do we, I think we have another one. And I mean, Austria is very much a pork eating culture,
mm.
more so than the UK. So it can be quite difficult, I think.
I'm sure like nobody would have a problem with us saying that Britain is more a curry eating culture than anything else, because it seems to be like one of the top three
Yeah.
favorite foods, curry,
Mhm.
in the UK. So it's quite interesting. Um, Did you think about your experience where, like, you obviously you've been lead since you started, you became self-employed, you said, and you started running your own consultancy, um,
Mhm.
managing teams abroad where maybe people are from different cultural background. What challenges have you had to face?
I mean, that was a situation that I had mostly whilst I was employed because
Mm,
um, I was, I would always be responsible for a certain group of countries or as head of sales for a region. And so I always either had distribution partners where you need to manage them to get them to do basically the best thing that you think for your brand. So you have that kind of double thing. You have the cultural difference and you have the situation that actually from a, let's say from a hierarchy perspective or a disciplinary perspective, they don't report to you.
Mm.
They're effectively your customer. Or you have teams, for example, I had a team in Turkey or a team in Shanghai um, who were therefore external teams that you've got to work with. And often it's very difficult for them to really feel like they're part of the team because when they're so far away, it's very easy to ignore their needs, as it were, in the sense of a lot of people in the team don't see those kind of outside offices as being a kind of a full member of the team. It's almost like, well, they're just an annoyance. When they want something, they're just being annoying. They're just being difficult. They're not.
Oh no.
Um, yeah, it can be really quite. It can be really quite difficult to act as the bridge between two different cultures, or maybe more than two different cultures, depending on what the project is that you're running, and to keep everybody um, not only satisfied but also productive can be really quite a challenge if you don't know how each of those cultures work. So when you've, for example, got somebody asks, send me a presentation with this information or with that information.
Mm.
There are countries like France, they build up a presentation in a completely different way to the way that the UK would build up the presentation. Often in the UK, you'd put at the presentation, you put your summary at the beginning,
Mm.
so that if you're talking to the board, for example, that they see the salient points right from the start. And then you explain it afterwards, so that if they're not paying any attention anymore, you've already given them the kind of heart of the matter. Whereas in France, you'd give them, this was our setting out scenario. This is what we thought could be the solution. You would go through all of these arguments and build it all up and only come to the conclusion right at the end. So
Mm.
your presentation is kind of a mirror image of the English presentation. So, for example, when I first started out in my career, I was working as the liaison person between the French head office and the English office of the company I worked for, and it was really quite complicated to get that communication piece
Mm.
really done well. Aside from any linguistic issues that might come up or that might go on. So yeah, it's always a challenge.
Sounds like a huge challenge to me. And yeah, I'm
Well,
I
of
am
course, because
impressed.
on the one hand, you've got those cultural questions,
Mm.
which are that maybe, for example, East Asians don't speak up in a meeting because they don't want to lose face or they don't want to appear like they're, you know, trying to do, trying to put their boss in a bad light or something like that. And on the other hand, if you've got, for example, Americans who feel, even if they actually have got no idea about what the topic is, they feel they've got to say something in order to be seen to be active in the conversation, then it can really get quite difficult because you don't just have the company culture, you also have the individual personalities as well, don't you? So you
Yeah,
you have extra layer on top just to make it all a bit more interesting, like the spice on the top.
it's
So
tricky. It's tricky, and especially with the time differences, and and oh my gosh, I once told somebody that I take a nap when I'm really tired during Ramadan. And I said, 2:30 in the afternoon, I just put the alarm on, 45 minutes, that's all I need. And I feel like the headache's gone. She said,
Hmm.
"You're the first person I've met in my life as a manager, the first manager ever who actually admits to having naps during the day." And I said, "Oh, what's wrong with that?" But then for years, I put pressure on myself to fit into British way of doing things by, whilst I'm fasting, I did everything. You know, I would run exercise classes when I used to do youth work many years ago in my 20s. I was running dance classes while I was fasting, and, you know, I couldn't drink water. And during 2014 organized an entire festival to attract 3,000 people um, throughout Ramadan. And I actually broke, it was the last 2 days after Ramadan, it was Eid, and the festival was day after. Now when I look back, Kathryn, I realize I've not been good to myself, been too
No,
harsh.
no. And you know, I had to get used to I had to get used to the idea of this kind of people taking naps after lunch. And in some places, like in Taiwan, I think it's even anchored in law that in an office that around the lunch break time, they have to dim the lights in the office so that anybody who wants to have a nap, you often see people, they'll have their lunch and then they'll come back to and they'll like put their head on their hands and have a snooze on their desk. Or, you know, sometimes depending on the chair, they'll let their chair back and that kind of thing. But people would say to me, we'll leave you on your own after lunch, and they would put me kind of back in the meeting room, and I would be like, and they would be saying, and they would come back in and say to me, are you doing emails? I would be like, well, yeah, because it was 8 o'clock in the morning in Austria, so the office had just opened, so I could just, you know, catch up on some calls or something. And they thought that I was going to be taking a nap and catching up. It took quite a bit of getting used to.
What country was that? Taiwan, did you say?
Taiwan, but China, Vietnam, that's also quite normal within the culture to have like around, let's say, half an hour after lunch just to, you know, as a short nap.
I mean, I didn't even realize it was a cultural thing, or I just thought my dad was like that, because I don't see it amongst a lot of other Bengalis. But my father was always very disciplined around his meal times. You know, 1 o'clock was his meal time. He was a proper British in some ways, but some ways very Bengali. So he would have his lunch at 1 o'clock. If it was more than half an hour late, he would refuse to eat. I mean, he would have his temper tantrum. And he always, without fail, would have a nap at 2 and for an hour every day. And you know what, Catherine? I never saw my father unhealthy. He was fit as a fiddle,
Yeah.
and he used to walk so fast, I used to run to keep up with him.
Yeah, but it's healthy, isn't it? It's more healthy to have a short nap in the middle of the day than actually to just keep going and keep going and keep going.
Yeah, and culturally as well, with a lot of Muslims, we're getting up really early to pray. And
Yeah,
then that,
especially during Ramadan,
yeah,
it's important. And I
yeah,
can imagine, like you said, getting a headache because, yeah, needing
long
something
day.
to drink and yeah.
Long days, and you've got to make up for the sleep that you lose. And so in the past, I would fight it because I think it was more because of my Britishness.
Right. Yeah.
My Britishness meant like I'm going to be like everyone else that I'm meant to be. And I think with the next generation, like my children's generation, they were a bit like that. But I think in the last few years, we've kind of evolved. And with my son, he's very good. I mean, he's a big fan of Japanese culture, so you can imagine.
Mhm.
And he's into meditation and part of Zen society. So he's very much in like his own zone of, and he's introvert, whereas I'm an extrovert. So he needs his quiet space and quiet time.
Yeah. But I think that's important. And I think times are changing. And amongst a lot of people are much more aware of this idea that we need to practice self-care, which in the past, I don't remember growing up ever being told. I mean, yes, I was told I should, that it was important to get enough sleep and that it was important to eat healthily and those kind of things. But in that way of, you have to do what is best for you, it wasn't that kind of individualistic way of talking about it. It was like, well, you should take care of yourself, but this is how you need to take care of yourself. There wasn't any kind of idea that maybe what constitutes self-care for you doesn't work as well for me,
Mm,
or doesn't work for the next person, because for you self-care might be to go out and spend time with your extended family,
mm.
whereas for somebody who's more introverted, they might just want to hide in a corner with a book somewhere to, you know, to gather energy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, no, I hear you, and this is the thing, isn't it? As we get older, and the more we learn about life in general and keep on searching. I mean, I always thought my life's purpose was to just give, 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 give. I always thought that. And when my son and I have conversation, he always says, like, I wish I could be like that. And whereas I see that as a weakness in me as well sometimes, because when you are constantly thinking about, it's not even just about giving, it's about, for me, the way I see it is the soul nourishment is important for me. I have to feed my soul. And for me to feed my soul, I have to be doing things that are, I can see the outcomes and the rewards.
yep.
That's dangerous as well. It can be.
Yeah, because it's almost, I would say that that is almost addictive, and because it feels like you're doing the right, it feels like you're doing something positive, and so you can get kind of caught up in that cycle of always doing and always just giving, 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 until the point where you don't actually have anything left, can't you? I mean, have anything left, any energy left is what I mean.
Yeah.
Not,
And that's the key, learning to balance and actually saving some of that energy for you, for
yeah.
yourself. And that's why I feel like I'm becoming more introverted with age now, Catherine, because I love my evenings to myself. Sometimes I won't even share that I've just got the time to myself. I might want to just do nothing, or a bit of baking, or like, put some seedlings, like TLC to the seedlings, or watch a bit
Mhm.
of telly. Actually, today I was watching Dragon's Den.
Yeah, but why not? You have to find your own balance, and I think that that changes with the seasons of life, doesn't it? That, and I think that a lot of people, especially during the last 3 years, realized that actually the kind of, you get used to living at a certain pace. I mean, if I sit and think, I used to be at least 10 times a year in Asia.
Wow.
Um, and so at least every month I was 1 or 2 weeks in Asia. So I had that kind of rhythm of, I would fly out on a Sunday night, which meant leaving home early afternoon on Sunday, and I would come home either um, Friday early afternoon or the week after Friday early afternoon. So,
Oh,
and
wow.
if I was away over the weekend, then I would just work through, because it meant that I could come home earlier, if you like. I could use those 2 days. And it isn't until you actually stop doing that and you kind of step off that merry-go-round that you realize just how potentially self-destructive that is, because you're caught up in that idea of doing, 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 and you just keep moving so fast that you don't realize that it's really not that healthy. And it took me a long time to kind of come down from that level, and to say, okay, And now I'm not sure if I could actually do that again. I mean, I'm sure you probably could, but it's like a muscle that has to be built up. And I think a lot of people over the last 3 years have realised that their previous lifestyle of always doing and out every weekend or going away lots, or that maybe that wasn't the ideal solution for them.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. I hear you. I mean, I think you feel it, don't you? I mean, I've never. It's always been work, work, work. I never really had the time to go abroad as much. So I think the most I've been abroad like last year and this year's plans already at least 3 times. But that's what I've wanted to do and not really had the time. I think I could have made the time. It's that judgment that we make ourselves, because as we keep on doing, we get faster and better, faster
Mm.
and better. So it looks like everything is so easy. But if you've got several teams doing several things, it does free you up more. If you stop feeling so guilty. And I've been talking to a lot of people that have reached out to me, some via LinkedIn actually, to say that, Munwara, like, I hear what you say and it resonates. I feel like I'm like that, or I want to
Yeah.
do this and I want to do that. And I think, like, because I'm always putting it out there on LinkedIn, it might look like I'm doing a million things. I think a lot of people are doing a lot of things, they just don't share it. And I
Yeah.
don't share it because I want to show off. I share it because I want people to know that um, there is a person who is very similar to them who is doing these things, and perhaps we don't still realize our self-worth after having achieved so much. And I've had to always balance, okay, you don't want to come across like you've got an ego,
No,
and
not at
and you
all.
want to be a Muslim woman who is humble.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's that dilemma.
But on the other hand, there are a lot of people whose idea of an ideal week is to, let's say, work 9 to 5, come home, have the tea, and sit in front of the telly, and who can't imagine that they're involved in some kind of volunteering activities,
Mm,
or in some kind of, maybe they go out a couple of times a month, maybe they play in a football team or something like that, but they don't necessarily have that kind of level of commitment to all kinds of outside obligations, and they just can't imagine what it would be like to be involved in
mm,
so many different things, you know.
mm.
And usually the people who are involved in those kind of things, they're involved in lots of things because they're those kind of people who don't like to say no to things, and who
I find that I'm the instigator. I'm the troublemaker. I usually instigate things, and then five, six, seven, 10 other people come forward and they say, "Yeah, we want to do it too." And I wish at that point I could just say, "Okay, then let me walk away." Sometimes people like the comfort of knowing that there is someone that has their
yeah,
back. And I'm quite happy to
yeah,
be that person, so long as it doesn't create more work for me. I have to say, in the last 3 years, I have been saying a lot more no's, and part of that was a personal experience, because with family members, where
hmm,
I felt like they were draining me, and it came
okay,
to a point where, like, extended family, it came to a point where everybody realized it, and they said to me, and in fact, it's the other family members that now say, "It's your time now. Do you what you want to do?" And I'm like, "Well, you guys made me into a monster now. It's too late. Now you unleash me. I might go wherever. Don't be afraid of what you might see next." So, so it's quite interesting. But we're talking about food last
mm,
week, and I want to come back to
okay,
that.
yes.
How have you found food has helped you to break down, like, barriers when you've traveled abroad or gone to met a new culture?
I mean, firstly, I think on the very surface of the topic, then going out with a new business partner to have a meal of some kind is the easiest way to start talking about their culture, because it's the easiest opportunity to ask questions, how certain things need to be done. I mean, I remember my first trips to Asia and asking about etiquette around using chopsticks, for example. I knew I knew the physical movement before that time, but asking, is it polite to do this, or should I hold them more like this, or and it gives you a way in, it gives you an opener, if you
Mm.
like. And as time goes on, it's also one of those things. For example, in China, Vietnam is also quite similar. You usually in China, people like to have lunch at 12 and dinner at 6. And if you're in the middle of a long negotiation, often a European is tempted to say, "Oh, let's just finish this. Let's." But actually, you realize that if the other person is getting hangry, then you're just going in circles, with your
Mm.
discussions. It's much better often to just say to them, "I tell you what, let's go and have a quick lunch, and then come back and we'll look at it again." And you come back, your brain is refreshed, everybody's relaxed, stepped down a bit from their tense discussions, maybe about pricing and all those kind of
Mm.
difficult topics. And then it's much easier to move the conversation forward again, because everybody's had a chance to like step back a little bit from their ego, to reflect a little bit, not just to have something to eat. And I think that food represents so much more. Food is a way of expressing your respect for somebody, isn't it? It's a way of expressing your concern or your care for somebody. It's not, let's say, it's not for nothing that in a lot of European cultures there's the expression that basically the way to somebody's heart is through their stomach.
Mm.
So I don't know if you have that in Bengali culture as well, but
We do, we do. Food is important when someone is born. Food is important when someone gets married. Food is important when someone dies.
yeah.
Like, for example, a friend of mine, she lost her father-in-law a few days ago, and today is like the day of prayer, and everyone will gather. It's just like
Mhm.
you would if for a funeral. If you think about it, like it's so important, and like what's interesting is like food tends to be similar, and like when I hear as a Muslim, if I hear that somebody has lost like a family member and they might be a non-Muslim or non-Asian, and I go to their house, I would never go empty-handed, because I
Mhm.
know why we do it in our culture. We do it
Yeah.
because at that time people are in mourning, and they're going to naturally have guests coming through the door. And if you take a few snacks and biscuits and cakes and stuff, then they've got it all topped up so that when the guests arrive, there's something to give with the tea or coffee.
And they don't have to worry about it, do they? It's
Exactly.
already there. It's in
Exactly.
the same way that when somebody has a baby or so on, that yeah.
Yeah, and when we like with the whole mourning, the grieving process as well, like for the first week, friends and family will talk amongst ourselves, and we will organize it. So somebody will say, okay, tomorrow I'm going to provide lunch, or I'll give
Okay.
enough meal for lunch and dinner for that family, so that they don't have to cook. They can focus on grieving, they can focus
Mhm.
on like prayers and things, because we believe like within the first weeks or days of somebody's death, it's more important that we pray for our loved one's soul to be in peace, to rest in peace,
Mhm.
as opposed to like food and feeding, and that's not like a primary focus.
Priority.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a priority. But what's interesting is like what you take to people's houses becomes really people remember. I just remember this extended family member who lost their father to cancer, and they had a huge family, and they're like a relative through marriage. And I decided I was going to fry fish. And when I went there, and there was these teenage girls, and they just jumped on the food and started eating, and they said, "Thank you so much." And I said, like, I just brought food like everyone else. And they said everyone had been bringing in chicken curry and dal, and you brought fish, and it was a change.
Yeah. Yeah.
you know
Hmm.
it's all fascinating, isn't it? It brings people together, and all those occasions, death and marriage and birth.
Yeah. And even if, I mean, in all kinds of situations, it breaks the ice, doesn't it? It gives it also, even when it's not such life-changing situations like birth, marriage, death, um, eating together is one of the foundations of so many different kinds of relationships, and it
Mm.
really helps to cement a relationship. A lot of my business relationships have been built around that thing of having lunch together and having dinner together, and seeing what different people's preferences are, and remembering the next time that when you take them to a restaurant, the next time you choose something that might suit their preferences more, or might have one of their favorite dishes on the menu or something like that.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
those
yeah.
kind of things help. It's there are people who always say, oh, it's just business, but business is done between people. So if you can't build those relationships, and food is one of the best ways to cement a relationship, then you're not actually going to be, you might do business, you might do one deal, but you're not going to do business over the next 10 years with that person, or over the next 20 years, you know? And for me, there are people in, there are some of my business partners that I've done business with now for almost 20 years, over um, being both employed and now self-employed. And that when they want somebody for a project, that they're looking for something, then it's me that they'll call, because we've spent so long working together that I know what would work for them, and I think that a lot of that is just taking the time, because going for a meal with somebody is also giving them your time, isn't it? And that is one of the most valuable things you can do.
Yes, absolutely. Whether you're cooking for them or you're going out for a meal, it's time.
Yeah,
And you learn so much in that relaxed environment, don't you, about the other person?
yeah, definitely, definitely.
And that's the part, like, I cannot begin to emphasize enough on social media, because I've had people just bombarding me with sales pitches, and I just feel like I don't even know you. I don't even know what you're saying. There's any truth in it, and yet you want me to buy a service from you.
Yeah.
And I would say the same thing. A lot of people that I've developed relationship, either I've worked with them, they've worked with me over the years, and that has been part of my really huge support network over the last, at least for the last 15 years in this area where I've been working. So
Hmm.
I hope that people are taking note to some of your key suggestions and tips around relationship building and
Well, at the end of the day, food is something you've got to, everybody has to eat. So you might as well enjoy it, and you might as well use it, grasp the opportunity to strengthen the relationship with your business partners, with your work colleagues, or whoever it happens to be. And it also helps you, it gives you a door into other cultures, doesn't it? If you sit and look what different people bring to the office, even for their lunch, then it gives you insight into their culture. And I mean, of course, some of that is individual, and it's not, you can't generalize that everybody who is from Bangladesh is going to eat this at lunchtime, or everybody who is from Austria is going to eat that at lunchtime. But it gives you, over time, if you are genuinely interested, then it gives you that kind of peek through a doorway into another culture, and gives
Absolutely.
you a basis to build upon for your relationships.
Absolutely, absolutely. I got told, I used to get told I'm a feeder, but I find that the teams I work with over time, I can't think of any of them not being feeders. They all feel like feeders now. Because we've discovered that they all like to experiment. We discovered that, and that's the thing, people, we don't always feel comfortable. Like I could, as a Muslim person, and a huge compliment to you, Catherine, if I just based on your activity on LinkedIn, I would be totally comfortable eating with something that you would provide because I know you get it. You understand my values.
Yeah. Hmm. But that's something that I had to learn because I didn't grow up in a culture. I didn't grow up in a particularly international environment
Mm,
because at home, I grew up in an environment surrounded by, there were some Scandinavian families because Grimsby is a fishing town. So there were links to Denmark and links to Iceland, but there were not very many, it wasn't a very diverse kind of environment. There were not many Asians around.
mm,
My sister had a friend who was, I think, of Indian origin, but that was basically it. I can't think of, if I think back to school, I don't think there were any other non-white faces.
mm, mm.
So yeah,
Yeah, it's just so interesting because like you're so different to maybe anybody else because we're all unique versions of ourselves, right?
yeah,
And I think the difference between what I see with you and maybe some people I've worked with over the years is that you have the confidence and the honesty about what you do know and what you don't know and being able
yeah,
to share it. Most people that actually don't know and have little awareness will just stay quiet because they don't want to be um, you know uh,
yeah.
and it can be purely innocent, and I've seen that happen where I felt it for somebody I am responsible for who is completely unaware of the Asian culture, and I could really see that that person is going to be seen as, oh yeah, you're white, you are XYZ background and you're of this age category, so therefore you're going to have that perception, right?
Hmm.
But perceptions change. It's because
Yeah,
people don't know.
yeah,
That's how I feel anyway.
yeah. No, I'm always the same, and I think that for me, when I went to uni, and I had a really quite diverse group of friends when I was at uni, um, that was what kind of started opening that door for me into really seeing other cultures and how other families live,
Hmm.
you know.
And that's such a great way of that door opening because I think for me as well, going to America and seeing how different it was there,
Oh,
although I wasn't really comfortable, but discovering the meaning of the word redneck, as they called it in South.
mhm,
I had everything was very new to me. I didn't know what that meant. But my classmates, my uni friends, they seemed to, or the flatmate that I went with was the one protecting me. I was very young and like unsure, uncertain. And I think working in environments where there's been a mix has really helped me. And then in a leadership role, you have the responsibility to figure out where, these conflicts can arise.
yeah,
And I think for me, I found food. like, bonding activities through food. And the other one is music. And you didn't
Yeah.
mention it.
No, I didn't mention it up until now. Yeah, I mean, I guess a few people know by now that I'm a hobby musician, so I love to play clarinet and saxophone. And for me, music has been one of the ways that I've overcome because by nature really, I wouldn't say I'm a full introvert, but I'm quite shy.
Mm.
And so playing in all different groups, I mean, aged 16, I was lucky enough I went to the States with the UK Scout and Guide Symphony Orchestra.
Mm.
And that was a group of people who'd been brought together from all over the UK, which we didn't know each other in advance. I mean, I knew some people because I'd been the year before to the course, but and that kind of started me out on my journey. And when I came to Austria as an exchange student, as an English assistant for a small town, which is pretty much where I live now, then I'd asked, for example, if there was a school band that I could play with just to give me somewhere to make music. And the next thing I knew, I was integrated into the town wind orchestra. And that meant that all of a sudden I knew the mayor and I knew all of these kind of, I knew anybody who was important in town, I already knew them because, you were just introduced and I was just, that was for me what really accelerated my integration here in Austria. It's also how I met my husband because he played in ours. And I just really do feel that music and being able to going into any group, even if you don't know a single individual, but knowing that you have something that you're both passionate about in common really smooths the way to learning about other people and being able to be feeling confident enough to be curious about it. And I think that music is one of those things that transcends language. So there may be different styles in different parts of the world, but certain things kind of remain and speak to the heart. So that's something that's important for me.
Yeah, no, I completely, that resonates with me completely. And I do feel music breaks down barriers in such a way. I can't begin to say. Years ago, a colleague said, but you're Muslim women don't do dance and music and things. You've been to a lot of Asian countries, and you could probably highlight or give us insight as to how much, whether Muslim or not, music influences.
Yes, music influences. I don't know of any culture that by nature doesn't have music in some form as part of its celebrations.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that is just a natural part of human nature, isn't it? Whether it be more rhythmically based or more melodically based, then I think right from back in the Stone Age, then music has been something that has brought people together, that has strengthened the bonds between them.
Absolutely. I do think, with a pessimistic mind, where the glass is half empty, people do see sometimes food as and music as being the barriers. For example, the example that you gave around not catering for someone's needs for that reason. And equally, there are certain, groups within a religion, like Islam has lots of different sects,
Yes. Yeah.
and where some will say
Christianity too.
it's allowed and some isn't, etc. I mean, I won't go into that because this is not about that. It's not about, we're not having a discussion about people's individual faith. We're just talking about actually the positives of food and music, because I have seen music bring people together unlike anything else. And In fact, on the 29th of April, I've got a group of 7 young girls organizing a fundraiser, and it's a women only dinner and dance. And I said, I won't say this out loud, but it might go on air now. But why can't we have like, why do the Muslim girls have to go to or feel like they need to go clubbing? Why can't we create our own club? And so this event is purely focused at women having a good time, letting their hair down. And I wish, Kathryn, you could come and really be there. But I don't know what your plans are. My last thing to you before we kind of, close off,
Mhm.
you can close off
Yeah.
if you want, but is, what do you think you and I have in common then? What connects us?
Wow. I think it's our I think it's our passion for life and for other people. You know, I think that at the core is what connects us, because on paper we have in some ways quite different backgrounds, although we're both academic women. We've had academic training, at least, let's say, and so I think at the core we're both people who really care a lot about people and who really like to get involved and to live life. So, yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love that, living life. Sounds wonderful. Anyway, thank you very much, Kathryn. I'm so grateful that you made your time on a Sunday evening. Anything else you'd want to say before we kind of say goodbye to our audience?
No, I would just say thank you very much for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure to chat. And
Thank you.
yeah,
Thank you, Kathryn. Have a wonderful Sunday, or what's left of it.
thank you.
And see you around. And there's an invite open to you when you're down.
29th
Yes,
April.
April. Take care.
Okay.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Bye bye.